today's episode on Workplace Wellness Redefined, How Your Environment Impacts Your Health with Dr. Esther Sternberg. Really interesting content. This is a true expert on integrative medicine applied to workplaces. So integrative health and wellness, the concepts of how our mind and our body are related and how our health is no longer just physical. It's the health of our emotions. It's the health of our spirit. It's the health of our social connections. Health has lots of elements. Workplaces have traditionally not been healthy places for human beings. That is changing thanks to the amazing research of experts like Esther Sternberg. So you're going to learn about what it means to have a healthy office, whether it's in an office environment, a traditional workplace, or at home. There's different elements. There's 7 elements of workplace health, and her book gets into that. But she'll share some of that with us today. So for those of you who are interested in having healthier environments so that you can thrive and be at your best, and for organizations who want to be healthy places for people to be engaged and perform their best and be productive, that does impact your bottom line. That decreases turnover, that increases commitment and engagement, and it keeps people well. It keeps people from getting sick, because if we're unhealthy and we're stressed, we will get sick physically. So, with that said, I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Where Work Meets Life. I'm Dr. Laura, and I'm delighted to be here today with you talking about Workplace Wellness Redefined, How Your Environment Impacts Your Health, with Esther Sternberg, MD, author of Well at Work, Healing Spaces, and the Balance Within. She's a professor, a research director, a speaker, a consultant, and she was introduced to me through Philip Van Houten, who has been a longtime friend and mentor of mine, and she is prolific in the world of understanding the impacts of workplaces on human beings. She's a pioneer and major force in collaborative initiatives on mind, body, stress, wellness, and environmental interrelationships. She's currently the research director of the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. She's a research professor of medicine with joint appointments as professor in psychology, architecture, and planning and landscape architecture. So you can see the diversity of fields that Esther covers and the interdisciplinary nature of her research. Most notably, she was recognized by the National Library of Medicine as one of the women who changed the face of medicine. So that is outstanding. Welcome to the show, Esther.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I know it's your Memorial Day, and that's when we're recording this, but I just want to say thank you for taking the time. We had a LinkedIn Live go wrong last week, and here we are on the podcast. And I always say that tech gremlins happen, and we don't work in the ER, luckily, so no one was hurt. But being a medical doctor, I'm sure you've dealt with so many different things in your career. But I'm wondering how you started as a medical doctor and how you ended up focusing on workplace and work-life wellness, Esther.
Well, it was a long journey, a fun journey. I think one of the wonderful things about it being a physician is you can have multiple careers in series. And by the way, I am Canadian. I graduated from McGill University School of Medicine, and I trained in rheumatology at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal, and went on to be in what we call general practice, family practice, for a couple of years in a suburb of Montreal. And what I found at that point was that most of my patients had some kind of joint pains, and I didn't know much about it. So I went back and trained in rheumatology, also at the Royal Victoria Hospital. And so I became a rheumatologist, and I was fully intending to go back and be the rheumatologist in the clinic where I had been working as a family practitioner. And on the last year of my fellowship training, Christmas Eve, I was called to see a patient at the Montreal Neurological Institute who had developed an autoimmune scarring disease when being treated with an experimental drug for a very severe and actually fatal form of epilepsy that he had. His epilepsy got better, but he developed this autoimmune disease. And seeing that convinced me that doing something to the brain can affect the immune system. And so that set me on a course of research where I spent the rest of my career trying to figure out how the brain and the immune system communicate, how they talk to each other, and eventually found my way to the National Institutes of Health, where I discovered that the brain's stress center, the hypothalamus, is important in susceptibility to autoimmune inflammatory disease like arthritis in rats. And when you can prove that in rats, the scientific community, the medical community sits up and listens. Until then, that was in 1989. Those of us who were studying the brain immune connection were kind of considered fringe. I mean, the department chair told me, Esther, you're going to ruin your career. Don't do this. There's no such thing as the mind body connection. Another one of my supervisors said, you'll do this research when grass grows here. And so for some bizarre reason, that only stimulated me to continue doing this. I was sort of contrarian, I guess, this research. And there was a band of us across the country, around the world, who were studying the various ways in which the brain and the immune system communicate. So that became the science of the mind-body connection, and how stress makes you sick, how believing can make you well. I actually talk about this in my first book, The Balance Within: The Science Connecting Health and Emotions. But how do you get from that to the built environment? Well, I was at the National Institutes of Health and studying basically stress and illness. And the then research director of the US General Services Administration, the agency of the federal government that owns, operates, and builds all non-military federal buildings, overseeing over 2 million office workers for over 374 million square feet of office space. So Kevin Campshire, who was director of research for the GSA, came to me knowing that I'm an expert in stress and asked me a single question. And that question set me on this course. He asked me, how can you help me measure the impact of these built office spaces on health, well-being, and performance of these office workers? I want my office workers to be happy and healthy. Now, that was back in the year 2000. That was sort of a unique concept at the time. People or organizations were more interested in squeezing as many people into an office space as possible, cubicle farms, optimizing number of people per square foot without paying attention to how they felt and how they were, whether they were healthy or not. So back in 2000, we started on this course of using wearable devices to measure the impacts of the built office spaces on health, well-being, and performance. And in those days, in 2000, it wasn't like I'm wearing this wearable device here, Ring. I'm sure you may be, or others listening may be wearing watches. In those days, the heart rate variability monitor, which is really the way to measure the stress and relaxation response, was a huge thing about the size of my hand, glued to your chest with wires. And with it, we could measure the stress and relaxation response over a period of 2.5 days, including at night, in a building that was being retrofitted to go from high wall cubicles, dark, dingy, musty, high, loud mechanical noise, to open office design with beautiful views and lots of circadian light and low mechanical noise. And For whatever reason, I was surprised that we were able to actually measure a substantial decrease in the physiological stress response in the people in the new space compared to the old space. And that carried over to when they were at home at night while they were sleeping. So that told us that you really do take your office space home with you at night. And when we asked the people, were you more stressed or less stressed in the different spaces, they were not consciously aware of it. We become so used to working, living in uncomfortable places that we don't realize how much it really affects our body and our physiological stress response.
You're a pioneer. You're a thought leader. You're a pioneer. You take the plunge into doing something that was well ahead of its time. And here we are today, and your research is so beneficial. And I'm so glad that some offices are moving away from cubicle farms and unhealthy environments. And I think COVID taught us a lot in that regard as well.
Well, this is the story I tell in Well at Work, creating well-being in any workspace. I start with the story I just told you. Um, Actually, I start at the time of the downturn, with which hit the building sector, the design professions particularly hard back in 2008, 2009. And I was invited to speak to the American Institute of Architecture students. So there were about 500, 600 graduating architecture students from all over the United States and Canada. And it was December 29th in 2009. So it was the depth of the downturn, and I was the second keynote speaker. And the first keynote speaker, and this is how I start the book with this story. The first keynote speaker was a business person, and he said to this audience of fresh, enthusiastic architecture students champing at the bit to get out into practice, forget about it. There are no jobs. The major architecture studios are shedding their staff, and it's the young people who are getting laid off first. So then I had to stand up and speak to this audience. It was like speaking to a funeral. And I jettisoned my remarks and I went to the front of the stage and I said, "You, the next generation of design professionals, are our health professionals, partners in the health of this nation. We cannot do it without you. We cannot tell people to go home and exercise if there's no place to exercise. We cannot tell people to find a place to feel, to meditate or to be, to find some calmness if there's no place to do it. We need you to design these spaces." So I got a standing ovation before I even began to talk. But what I didn't realize is that in the audience were two presidents of the American Institute of Architects. And when I was doing my book signing, this was for my second book, Healing Spaces, The Science of Place and Well-Being. And when they came up to get their copies of the book, they said, "You've given us an idea." And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Would you be willing to work with us? We're creating a design and health leadership initiative across all the American Institute of Architects knowledge communities to bring health front and center into the design of all buildings, not just healthcare facilities." And so that launched the design and health movement in the American Institute of Architects. And you mentioned COVID. So then what happened? Again, I tell this story in the book. When I moved to the University of Arizona to become research director at the Andrew Weil Center of Integrative Medicine, Kevin Campshire, by then was director of high performance federal green buildings, eventually became the chief White House sustainability officer for the GSA. And he asked me to continue the research using state of the art wearable devices. By then, the chest worn devices were the size of a quarter, and we were able to measure stress and relaxation response, sleep quality, movement, posture, and people's moods, and link those health outcomes to up to 11 different environmental attributes measured continuously and in real time, working with a company from the Bay Area called Aclima that had developed these devices. So we were able to come up with a prescription for a healthy well-being building that Kevin Kampshire could then use to create those happy, healthy, high-performing spaces for his office workers. And then COVID happened. And COVID really brought the health in inside buildings front and center. If you remember those animations from the internet showing the virus being spread through the ventilation system, people dying from sitting underneath a vent, it became really clear that in order to prevent viral infection and viral spread, you needed to have excellent fresh air turnover, frequent fresh air turnover in your ventilation system, excellent filtration. Who knew what MERV 13 filters were before COVID? And that's where masking and distancing came into play as well. And yes, all of those things reduce viral spread, because whether you get sick from a virus depends upon the dose to which you're exposed, the duration of exposure, and your own resilience. So fixing the ventilation system prevents or reduces the dose and the duration of exposure. But it is through the 7 domains of integrative health that you enhance your own resilience. And that's in Well at Work. I talk about each of those 7 domains of integrative health and how you can embed well-being into buildings in order to keep people happy and healthy and resilient, using each of these 7 domains as a framework.
Awesome. So when you think of those 7 domains, which ones are the top health saboteurs in today's office environments?
So what are those 7 domains of integrative health as defined by the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine? Sleep, which is really important for health and well-being. Resilience, which is how quickly you bounce back from any stressor, whether it's infectious or whether it's psychological, whether it's stress. So that's stress and relaxation response. Environment, which includes clean air and the green environment, nature. Movement, relationships, spirituality, and nutrition. So in Well at Work, I talk about how you can create workspaces that embed and embody each of these 7 domains.
Wonderful. So, to my question, which of those domains do you see as being big misses in organizations?
Well, the biggest complaint when we published our paper showing that open office design is actually healthier than private offices and cubicles. And what we found in using these wearable devices is people who are in open office design move more during the day, are significantly less stressed at night, and sleep better at night. And the next day they wake up more refreshed, less fatigued, and in a better mood. Well, we published our first paper, and there was a hue and cry of people who hate open office design. Now, why do they hate open office design? It's the noise. Well, this is not rocket science. You're sitting in a studio. Your producer is sitting in a studio. You know how to mitigate noise. I talked to the general manager of Arizona Public Media, who are building a new building for their television and radio studios, and I was talking to him about this issue. He said, "We start with an acoustical engineer. The acoustical engineer drives the design of our buildings." Well, that doesn't happen with office spaces, or it wasn't happening, certainly from mid-century on. Every single material has an acoustical rating. If you pay attention from the beginning of your designing the office space to include materials that reduce noise, then you mitigate that problem and you can focus on the benefits of open office design. Now, open office design is a bit of a misnomer. It invokes a whole bunch of just desks, a field of desks. Well, really, it's more active office design, which is what Robert Propst designed in mid-century when he designed what became the dreaded cubicle farms. But the idea was that people should go to different stations where they can carry out their work, depending upon the kind of work they're doing, how they prefer to work, what time of day, how they're feeling. And if you design the office space in that way, you can have the benefits of open office, active office design without the detriments of noise.
Okay, so if I am sitting out in the open and I need to focus and I find noise gets in the way of my focusing, would I wear noise canceling headphones?
Yes, so that's the great thing is we're sitting here in an era where there's so many devices that can help with this. So you can use noise canceling headphones. If you like music, you can listen to music. If you like to listen to nature sounds, you can download nature sounds. There's pink noise, there's white noise. So there are personal devices that can help you in a space if the noise is something that bothers you. Now, interestingly, in that study, we also found that when it's too quiet, the stress response is higher. And, we know that loud noise harms the ear, that loud noise is stressful, but we were surprised to find that when it's too quiet, the stress response is higher. And there's a sweet spot, an optimal decibel level where the stress response is minimal and the relaxation or the well-being response is optimal, and that's at 45 decibels. And we don't really know why that is, but we think it's because when it's really, really quiet, you can hear a pin drop and that'll startle you. It's the difference between the background noise and the noise that you hear that will trigger your stress response.
Fascinating. This is so interesting. And I think with a lot of people being able to work from home during COVID and having that experience and then being called back to offices, it's just setting the bar higher. People don't want to go into an office that sucks their energy and that depletes them. They want an office that they look forward to going to. So describe, the ideal office environment that hits the mark on these different domains.
So what happened after we published this series of studies is yes. I mean, I actually wrote an op-ed piece for the local paper here saying that I live about 10 or 20 minutes from 5 world-class spas. Nobody is mandating people to go to those spas. People want to go to those spas because they are designed and operated to attract people to work. So what happened during COVID and post-COVID, and it's still happening, is it's being called the downtown apocalypse, where people don't want to go back to work. They want to stay working from home. And the downtowns are dying because the restaurants are not being frequented, the stores are not being frequented, and organizations are turning to mandating people back to work. But if you mandate somebody back to work to an office space that has high 6-foot high cubicles, no circadian light, loud noise, no matter how good the ventilation is, they're not going to want to go back to work. So I was able to put these principles into practice when Dr. Andrew Weil uh, had the opportunity to build a new building complex for the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. And Dr. Weil, we call him Andy, asked me to convene a committee of architects and design professionals to advise or to work closely with the architects who were designing the building. Henry Tom Line and Space was the architecture firm. And I convened a committee that included the Dean of the College of Architecture, several faculty, expert in various aspects of design and sustainability, and my colleagues from the U.S. General Services Administration. And our first task was to make sure that we embedded all 7 domains of integrative health into those new buildings. And our second task was to make sure that we balance that with sustainable design. Um, so how does that work? So one of the really important things that we wanted was lots of circadian light, full spectrum sunlight, because that's really important for healthy sleep. It's counterintuitive that what you do in the morning affects how well you sleep at night. But if you are exposed to full spectrum sunlight from 8 a.m. to 12 noon, then you sleep better at night. You fall asleep faster, you have better sleep quality, you wake up the next day in a better mood and more refreshed. So we wanted walls of glass. And I remember my GSA colleague said, well, you're in the desert. You can't build a glass box in the desert. Um, but the dean of the College of Architecture, who's a landscape architect as well, said, well, you could put trees. And we had the sustainability experts to make sure that we included features that reduce heat gain. That's again, we are living in an amazing time when there are amazing devices and materials that can mitigate these problems. So we have high performance glass, we have external shades angled exactly to the path of the sun to make sure that there's shade. We have mesquite trees that are growing like weeds now, and they're up to the second floor of the building. We have shaded overhangs. So we have three buildings: the Mind building, the Body building, which is now called the Cantor building, and the Spirit building. And so the three are also surrounded by desert gardens. So one of the things that when people think about um, office spaces, they think about the inside, but you need to think about the office building in its context. And being in nature, being in green environments is really important for reducing stress and enhancing mood and enhancing well-being. So we on purpose put in desert gardens around the buildings. The gardens are connected to a next door park. And down the street, there's a community garden where they raise vegetables, and we're also working with them to get the fresh vegetables to our teaching kitchen. So we are supporting healthy nutrition. So again, movement. How do you support movement? You create staircases that attract people to come up, to walk up them. And of course, you have the ADA accessible elevators and so on, but a staircase that has beautiful views, lots of light, and it becomes also a place where people can gather. You need to have lots of gathering spaces to support relationships. Our staff lounge is not a cramped, dark, smelly, unpleasant space. It's a beautiful space with lots of windows, beautiful views, a full functional kitchen, and the staff love to go in there and cook and talk and eat, and that supports relationships. So one of the things that happened post-COVID is there was this sort of existential crisis in the office building industry, well, in all industries, saying, why do we even need a common office space if people can work from home just as well? Well, you can work from home if you are fortunate enough to have a private office, if you're not living with multiple generations where you have to take care of elderly parents or young kids. Um, so there is, in some cases, you can be more productive at home, but what then becomes the main reason for everybody going to an office space? It is the relationships. It is the sustenance that you gain from being with colleagues. It is the connection you gain with the organization. So it's less a place where you want to do heads down work. It's more a place where you can really engage with others. And, we can have back-to-back Zoom calls all day, and that's depleting. But if you have meetings at work, or you bump into somebody on the staircase, or you talk to somebody in the staff lounge, that's nourishing. And so that's really the reason to come to a common office space now, and how office spaces need to be designed to support that.
To support connection and collaboration and community.
Community is really important. Yep.
which is hard to replicate remotely, although I'm a fan of a hybrid. I mean, having a blend where I can do my heads down work at home and then come in for the community and collaboration. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's ideal. I do think that's ideal, and that's actually how I've operated my whole life. Uh, yes, I find that ideal, but then different people are different, you know. That's another thing we found in these studies, the different personalities. Some people prefer a quiet, darker space, and if they're more introverted, and people who are more extroverted like a lot of sort of activity going on around them, as long as there's not too much noise. And you know, those are probably the people working in the coffee shops all day. But that doesn't mean that an organization has to um, uh, give people a personality test and say, you sit here, you sit there. It means that you have to have lots of choices. You have to have choices for people to go to work in, depending upon the kind of work they're doing, how they feel at that moment in time, and their personality. And if you don't have lots of choices, you're not going to support the people in those spaces.
Gotcha. So, what I'm curious about, Dr. Sternberg, is about the spirituality element. So, what is that all about? I mean, in today's day and age, how do you define that and how do you create spaces that allow for it?
So when I use spirituality for an office space, I don't mean that you in a religious sense. There are elements of spirituality that are important for being in flow. So when you're in the zone, that is, you know, the brain is in a certain mode. It's not quite meditation because it's a little more active, but you don't realize that time is passing. So, what are the things that get you in the zone? And how can the built environment around you help you get in the zone? Well, if you're feeling too stressed or too activated, you want to do something that will tone down that stress response so you can perform at peak, because it's the stress response that really helps you perform at peak. If you're too stressed, you freeze, you're unable to focus, you're unable to do the job, the task at hand. So what helps you to move that stress response from the extreme danger zone back to performing at peak is places where you can go offline a little bit, where you can effectively meditate, even though you know, you're not sitting there with crossed legs in a lotus position and, you know, in a yoga studio. Although having spaces where some people can do that is also beneficial. But a space, for example, the gardens, to just walk in the gardens, to just take your brain off the computer for a while and focus on the green, on the plants, some place to sit quietly with a colleague and chat. Um, if you're feeling logy, on the other hand, if you're feeling sort of tired and your stress response is at a low ebb, you want to have a place or places where you can push that stress response to optimal performance, which is places to move, climb up and down the stairs. Actually, we have these beautiful three-story staircase in the Mind building. That's the main building. And some people have told me that they make sure they walk up and down the stairs 3 times a day, and they get their steps in, and it energizes them. The bodybuilding, which is it's, as I said, it's the Cantor building now. It's an open space. It's an open design, just an empty space with excellent noise mitigation. And there's a teaching kitchen in there. And it can be arranged to be a classroom. It can be a meditation space, a yoga studio. Now that's the job. That's the mission of the Center for Integrative Medicine, is to train healthcare professionals in these activities. But, you know, we do have body breaks, you know, where people can go and do their workouts. And so, again, you need the spaces to do these things in, but you also need programming to get people or to give people the opportunity to partake in these healthy behaviors.
Wonderful. So it sounds like there's quite a scope to this. There's a lot of different elements to consider, and some organizations can go through a major reno to make a lot of this happen. What about for organizations that don't have the budget for that? What are small changes that could be made to make a big difference?
Well, that's a really good question, and one of the things that we also learned in all of this research is one size does not fit all. And unfortunately, mid-century office buildings were designed with one size fits all. You know, everybody, the temperature is at a certain level and people are either too cold or too hot. Well, the good news is, again, because of devices that are available, you can create individual environments for people. Um, and that's cheaper than renovating the whole building. So you sort of take care of two issues at the same time. You get individualized spaces, and it doesn't cost as much to create these spaces. So temperature is a big issue. People, there's thermostat wars, right? People are always either too cold or too hot. Well, you can now buy an office chair that is a heated chair. When I was in Montreal, it was absolutely required. You had to have in your car seats had to be heated car seats. We don't need them in Tucson anymore.
I can see why.
Yeah. But you can get temperature regulated office chairs. If it's too dry, one of the things we found was when it's too dry, the stress response is higher, and when it's too wet, the stress response is higher. Well, you can have local dehumidifiers, local humidifiers on your desk. We talked about noise mitigation. Earphones are, the logical thing, but if you go to a museum now, and you stand in front of a painting, for example, there'll be a cone of sound that comes around you that explains what the painting is about, right? Have you been to such a museum? And so there are ways to uh, tar that to target sound to a to a smaller area so it doesn't disturb the person next to you. You can direct sound. So those are the kinds of things that can be done with a lower budget. And certainly, having plants, thinking about the outside and access to nature is really important. If you don't have access to a window, full spectrum sunlight boxes, which have been used for decades to treat seasonal affective disorder, is also beneficial.
Lovely. So tell us about your latest book and who it's for. So, who should be reading this and how they can get their hands on it?
Well at Work, Creating Well-Being in Any Workspace is my latest book. You can buy it anywhere where books are sold online or in your local bookstore. And who should be reading it? Everybody.
So, everybody should be reading Well at Work. What if I don't go into a traditional office? What if I'm a remote worker? Does it still apply to me?
Yes, it does. And I give tips on how you can create your home workspaces using this framework, thinking about each of these domains of integrative health and how you can create your own uh, home workspace. And it also applies to your own home. So the focus is on work. The stories are about how I, as a arthritis doc, came to be doing this work. It's about the scientists, the colleagues, the characters in the story, behind the science. So it's just an interesting story if you're interested in learning how these things are done or how they come about, which much of it is serendipity. Um, and but these principles can apply to your home as well.
Wonderful. So, my final question, Esther, is the world is a challenging place these days, and workplaces play a role in this. I've seen in my career. What's one wish that you have for a better world of work when it comes to human wellness?
Well, I really would wish that organizations continue to place physical health and emotional well-being of their employees front and center in everything they do. in the ways they design the workspaces and the ways they program and operate them. And, there's many studies showing that the greatest expenditure an organization has over the 30-year lifespan of a building is not the cost of the building, it's the cost of the people in the building. And if you can do whatever you can do to reduce the stress and improve the resilience and the well-being of the people in those buildings, you will reduce your costs, your bottom line, you'll reduce turnover, staff turnover, and you'll have a healthier organization as well. And you'll have people committed to your organization because they know that you care about them. So that's my hope and my dream, and that's what I hope the book will help to do, to move the needle a little bit forward on that.
Beautiful. And I want to thank you. Thank you for moving this needle and being an advocate and a thought leader around making work healthier and the power of integrative medicine, which I really believe in. So thank you, Esther.
Thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure. Lots of fun talking to you and meeting your audience.
And I know that many people will benefit from this episode, so stay well. Thank you for tuning in to Where Work Meets Life. If you found this content valuable, please rate, review, and share with others who may benefit. If you're struggling in your work life and need support, I offer coaching sessions. You can book a complimentary consult on my website. I'm also a passionate keynote speaker and would love to discuss your professional speaking needs. Visit my website, drlaura.live, to sign up for my monthly e-newsletter filled with tips and resources to help you stay well.